Good afternoon, one and all. Welcoming all for the session again. ESG is a measurement of a company's collective social and environmental awareness. It is usually a score derived from data gathered around specific indicators relating to intangible assets inside the company. It could be considered as a form of corporate social credit score. To emphasize more on this, I would like to call Ms. Mriti Ahuja, Chief People Officer at Times Internet, to moderate our panel discussion themed Creating Organization with Sustainability as Core Value, ESG, Environment Sustainability and Governance. To introduce Ms. Smriti, she has over 3 decades of experience divided between independent consulting and corporates. She is an award winning learning designer and an executive coach for the CXO suite. She is also the founder of NCR based NGO serving in the field of driving better learning outcomes in school. Now, introducing Dr. Mukund Rajan. Dr. Mukund Rajan is the chairman of eCube Investment Advisors, which is a first of a kind platform created in 2019 to catalyze environment, social, and governance changes in corporate India. Welcoming you, Dr. Mukund Rajan. Introducing Ms. Manavi. Ms. Manavi is a transdisciplinary sustainability professional with cross sectoral experience in areas including sustainable land use, sustainable fashion, and sustainable tourism. She has worked on strategy, program management, and policy management, working with a range of stakeholders and organizations, including grassroots organizations. Now, requesting Ms. Smriti to please continue ahead. Thank you.
Thanks, Shloka. Thanks for the introduction and a very warm good afternoon to everybody logged into the session. As I was getting into the session, I was just thinking that we as mankind have always thought of ourselves as rulers of this planet, right? Starting from our ability to control the climate, get into air conditioned rooms, and not be dictated by the climate outside for our work schedules or our entertainment. And then, of course, control of our transportation, be it land, be it water, be it air. So it was understandable that we all had some level of hubris as being the proprietors of this planet, till we, of course, got a lashback during COVID. We've all had early signs. There have been some form of, whether we call it endemic or pandemic, whether with Ebola or swine flu. But I think this was the first time with COVID that the entire planet or the entire humanity collectively experienced the same thing at the same time. Now, if that doesn't shake us, I don't know what will. So I think congratulations to the organizing team for having put this session of ESG as a part of the first day of the 3-day event. It is so critical. And we have two marvelous speakers who will help us tease out the aspects of what ESG would be. And I welcome, we'll do this in like about 35 minutes, and I welcome audience questions. So, Dr. Mukund, let me start with you. If you can simply explain now, the ESG term I know got coined around 2004, 2005, when the UN Secretary General, Mr. Kofi Annan, invited many leaders to think about sustainability and integrating it with the social responsibility context of an organization. But would love to hear in your experience and from your lens, what is the best way you would define ESG?
So, this is very much in line with what you just said, that a lot of what we're experiencing actually goes back in time. And ESG is really a way of trying to embrace and understand what is happening around us, but it's part of a long lineage. Think back 20 years to the concept of the triple bottom line: people, planet, and prosperity. Or more recently, there's been a lot of talk about stakeholder capitalism. All of these are really efforts to try and bring back the sense of what it means to be a responsible corporate. And I think ESG is as simple as that. It's a set of metrics that gives stakeholders a good sense of whether the corporate is acting responsibly in its conduct. As you rightly mentioned, I think what COVID has done, and also looking ahead, issues such as global warming and climate change, other global environmental issues, including loss of diversity, tropical deforestation, ozone depletion, these are all part and parcel of a new wave of events that are creating great concern across the globe. No one country can, on its own, resolve these issues. And therefore, there is alarm around the world about what it's going to take to resolve these issues. ESG gives you a handle to figure out whether corporates are doing their best to meet their responsibilities in tackling many of these issues. So I think the scale of problems has increased. Technology has unfortunately weaponized humankind's ability to create more devastation all around. And information is now much more widely available. So the average person with access perhaps just to the World Wide Web is now much better informed than ever before in human history. And therefore, stakeholders are also much more conscious and willing to act on their understanding and the new data that is becoming available to, in some cases, penalize companies and businesses that are not behaving responsibility. In many cases, also reward them if they do the right thing. So, really, ESG has to be seen in the light of all of these new developments as a mechanism through which you can recognize, appreciate, incentivize, and sometimes penalize businesses to do better on what matters for all stakeholders.
Right. And Dr. Mukund, now environment and sustainability is sort of well interconnected and understood. But when you say governance, what exactly is governance in this context? Because the little understanding that I have, it is more to do with maybe even stuff like compensation and pay parity, and I don't know how that melds into this environment and sustainability, which seems an entirely different thing.
So you could look at governance with two lenses. One is very purely the way in which business is being managed to ensure it's doing the right thing in all the expectations that stakeholders have. So does it have the right kind of board composition? Does it have the right kind of profile of independent directors? The inputs that you need to be able to make sure you're having an honest conversation with multiple stakeholders and taking the right actions based on a clearly agreed strategy. The other lens of governance is the governance of each of E, S, and G. And what I mean by that is, do you have an organizational capability to understand the risks and opportunities embedded in each of E, S, and G? Is there somebody in the organization who's vested with the responsibility of undertaking measures to ensure that you're on the right track? Do you have then a strategy and a policy in place? And do you have the right approach towards executing that strategy by creating alignment, certainly within your organization, and ideally by also bringing on board many of your stakeholders? So governance is both these aspects: the old sense of what does it take to say that a company is being governed well, good corporate governance, but also the governance, the stewardship, the oversight, and the cascading of a strategy across each of your E, S, and G commitments.
So I guess it really means that the professionals driving ESG also have to be at a certain level of seniority, right? So that
Absolutely,
they can
absolutely.
influence and drive that.
So increasingly, you're seeing sort of several models emerge. I think in India, quite recently, many companies, Infosys, Airtel, Ashok Leyland, are now creating ESG committees of the board. So responsibility is allocated right at the top. In other companies, NTPC in the public sector, Tata Steel in the private sector, have expanded the remit of the CSR committee. And they're calling it the CSR and Sustainability Committee of the board. And yet other companies are locating the responsibility within the senior management team. But you're absolutely right. I think it's elevating the discourse on sustainability. And oftentimes it is now right at the level of the board, where a lot of the discussion is taking place on what should be the policy and strategy of the organization in terms of its commitments to stakeholders.
Thanks, Dr. Mukund. And it's very heartening to know that I mean, it's been like 20 years. I'm glad it's getting the attention that it deserves. And that takes me, Manvi, to you. Why do you think it's getting that kind of an attention now? In my experience, this is the first time in HR forum we have the subject of ESG. It's very heartening, and by the end of the session, I think everybody will get a good grasp and a degree of familiarity on why it's so critical to us. But would love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, thanks, Priti, and great to be here. I think both of you already set the context on the urgency to kind of, apply the ESG lens in the corporate world. But I think if I had to just put it very plainly, it's because we simply don't have time. We don't have the luxury of time. And there is really no escaping the fact that we are interconnected. And what harms others or the environment will eventually harm us too, whether it's individuals, communities, or even organizations. And business is catching up to this reality. In fact, the World Economic Forum has been reporting consistently the last few years that environment and climate related risks are now among the top 5 global risks. And of course, the COVID-19 pandemic, like you alluded to, Smriti, in the beginning, should really be that ultimate, wake up call for us. Because the root cause of zoonotic viruses like COVID-19 can actually be linked to our altering relationship with nature. And and in addition, of course, the pandemic has also revealed our systemic interdependencies. We've witnessed lockdowns, and I also represent Make My Trip here. So we've witnessed lockdowns where we've actually seen the entire travel and hospitality industry come to a halt. We've also witnessed disruptions in global supply chains in the last 2 years. And then to add to this, of course, the climate crisis is not going away. It's looming over our heads. And scientists predict that, in fact, the rapid melting of the Arctic due to climate change could actually release long dormant viruses that have been frozen in the permafrost, the
Wow.
like of which modern humans have never grappled with. So this is really just the beginning, or like a glimpse of what could really follow. And last year, the UN Secretary General already declared the findings of the latest report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change to be a code red for humanity. And if you look at, our planetary systems, 9 out of the 5 regulatory systems that, regulate the planet are approaching tipping points. So we can't even fathom what the catastrophic consequences of that could be. And I mean, I'm not trying to project a doomsday scenario, but we are actually in the midst of an existential crisis as humanity, and business can no longer only exist for the sake of doing business. So, and I think I'd also like to add that, when we think of ESG, we might think of, it's about altruism, it's about doing good. But actually, given the kind of multiple crises that we are faced with, when it comes to business, it's really about self preservation as a business. And I really like how, this ecologist and design thinker whose work I really admire, his name is Daniel Christian Wahl. And the way he puts it is that, collectively as a species, we are undergoing a rite of passage triggered by the real possibility that business as usual will lead to our premature extinction. So this rite of passage is really about responding to these crises based on the awareness of our, interconnectedness, our systemic interdependencies. And I think this is really what ESG is, in heart and spirit. And as we start thinking about the new normal, the post-COVID era, I think it cannot exist without this thinking baked in.
Yeah.
And and we already know about, of course, ESG investing picking up in 2020. BlackRock, the largest asset management company in the world, announced that they would put sustainability at the heart of their investment decisions. On the regulatory front, of course, companies are being pushed to disclose their non-financial performance. But what I also wanted to add here is that corporate India does not have to wait for this external push. And the time is really ripe to reimagine a different future, and a new business models that are embedded within planetary boundaries, and contribute to societal well-being.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and we have to really bake this thinking that sustainability is good for business.
Yeah, no, Manvi, well put, and I'm glad you sounded the gong on existential crisis, because for those of us who've seen the movie Up in the Air, obviously, that existential crisis, even when it's staring us in the face, some people actually get more reckless. Not everybody gets cautious, right? And I mean, there was some such in a way shuddering moments in the film, which was a bit of a caricature of humanity, but actually, they were sort of putting that off to look at some beauty pageant results and saying, this is not interesting enough. To know that the humanity is going to get extinct in 6 months is not interesting enough and doesn't have enough TRP ratings. But I think you've laid the foundation for the next question actually to Dr. Mukund. So this point Manvi made about that, while there are now external drivers to include this in financial reporting, and India Inc. need not necessarily just wait for that. What is your assessment of how India Inc. has done on ESG?
So, if you look at broad indicators for the country, you'd have to say that India Inc. has performed very poorly. And take each of E, S, and G. If you take E, I think the state of the environment is no secret. We see and experience it every day. Those of you who are in the NCR region around this time of the year have typically been through some of the worst air pollution. India has a terrible record of over 20 of the 30 most polluted cities in the world being found in this country. And you look at land degradation, you look at water pollution, similar challenges that we have. If you turn to the S, look at our statistics on female labor force participation. We have, again, one of the lowest percentages in the world at a little over 22%, according to World Bank data, compared to a global average of 48%. If you look at the employment of members of the scheduled caste and scheduled tribe communities in the workforce, in the corporate force, in positions of influence in society, very, very poor indicators. And on governance, I mean, I don't need to say anything. Every day you just open the newspapers, there's a fresh scandal on the front pages. So corporate India has certainly not covered itself in glory on its ESG performance. And yet there are, I think, a number of good stories and good role models that have also been emerging. And I think there are a number of companies that are trying to do better and that have earned a lot of praise in the market for the actions they've taken, starting with good corporate governance. There are a number of companies that have now put in place mechanisms, as we just talked about a few minutes back, even ESG committees of the board. There's much greater awareness that they're creating within their organizations, stronger focus on issues around research and development and innovation to try and make the investments in some of the new business opportunities that are emerging. Take climate change as an issue, it's going to impact the auto industry in a big way. But some of the leaders there are now beginning to pivot towards electrification of their fleets. So it's those kinds of actions that you need to see more of in corporate in India. And indeed, some of those success stories are beginning to emerge. On diversity, again, I think more actions are being taken. A lot of this requires information and data, and then challenge by multiple stakeholders, including, as we heard just now, increasingly investors are coming to the party and demanding that companies perform better. Otherwise, they would be willing to pull their investments. I used to be in the Tata Group, and one of the wake-up signals for us in 2016 was when Norges Bank, which manages the Norwegian sovereign wealth, overnight decided to decarbonize their portfolio and pulled their investments in Tata Power simply because Tata Power at that time was predominantly generating energy based on coal-fired thermal power. So it's actions like those that are now persuading companies that it's important to act fast. And I think the best companies are beginning to do that. So I think you will see many more successes emerge in the Indian market. Also, on the regulatory front, I think there's a lot that is driving action. And in particular, in the immediate short term, I think the SEBI requirement that the top 1,000 listed companies in India need to produce what is called the Business Responsibility and Sustainability Report, the BRSR. They've also issued guidance on the key indicators that need to be reported on. That is voluntary this year and mandatory from the next fiscal. I think that is going to put a lot of pressure because companies are going to find that there are multiple people scrutinizing their BRSR reports very carefully. And the ones that don't step up will be named and shamed. And in the worst case, investors will pull their investments. So I think you're going to see a lot more activity in the next 12 to 24 months in corporate India.
I hope so, Dr. Mukund. And, as you were speaking, I was thinking that sometimes things change because they're policy driven. And, like you said, that the fund pulled out because it was using the fossil fuel to power Tata Power. And sometimes it's a movement from grassroots. And I was just thinking when you spoke about EV, have an EV vehicle called Reva, which I think started in the early 2000, but there were no takers. So there was no grassroots stuff. It didn't seem cool. It didn't seem fashionable. Now there are bamboo toothbrushes, and now it's almost like a bit of a fashionable statement as well, right? So that gets me to the question to you, Manvi, that if the corporate, the report card we heard from Dr. Mukund is that, India Inc. has not really covered itself in great glory in terms of ESG. If the policies aren't coming from the corporate world, should this mandate and this baton also be handed over to the employees to start this movement from the grassroots? And should the employees be creating their own movement and the push to see that the organizations they are a part of give this serious attention? And what is the implication of that, and how would you do it, and how does it impact the trends current and future?
Yeah, thanks, Priti. So I think as much as we need sustainability experts in organizations, and we need CSOs, and we need future CEOs to also be, sustainability managers. In fact, H&M, is in 2020 appointed a lady as their CEO who actually was a former sustainability manager. And I think we're going to see that trend in the future as well. CSOs becoming CEOs. But I also think that with that forward kind of looking lens, that given the scale of the crises that we face, every job will actually need to be viewed as a sustainability job, because uh, given the kind of effort that an organization needs to put in, ESG cannot rest solely on the shoulders, of CSR or sustainability teams. And essentially, employees at all levels, all functions, lines of business, will need to be able to, say sustainable and business in the same breath, which doesn't happen right now. And I think for this, sustainability really needs to be made personally relevant to each employee. So that is one. And I think we must also not forget that an employee as an individual is also a citizen and a consumer and a voter and an influencer and an investor. And younger employees in particular are seeking jobs that align with their personal values, ethics, jobs that have a higher purpose. And in fact, just recently I came across that Deloitte's 2021 millennial and Gen Z in Deloitte's 2021 millennial and Gen Z survey, 49% of people between the age of 18 and 25 and 44% of respondents between 26 and 38 said that they would pick their work and employers based on their personal ethics. And the younger group actually identified climate change as their top concern, while the older cohort identified it as their third highest concern. So I thought this was really interesting. And I think organizations, will need to attune more to the voices of the younger workforce in particular. And I think this is especially important because the future of work can expect more workforce activism. And to give an example again from the space of climate action, in September 2019, there were almost 4,500 plus climate protests that took place in 150 countries. And what's worth noting is that the role that employee groups actually played in mobilizing and coordinating action during these protests. And there was particularly participation from technology companies like Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Twitter. And in fact, more than 8,000 Amazon workers at that time signed a letter to CEO Jeff Bezos, demanding that Amazon take serious measures to cut its carbon emissions. So of course, workforce activism is going to increase, and there was also a report that came out in 2019 that surveyed, over 400 cross-sector C-suites worldwide, and found that over 80% of companies predict a rise in workforce activism, with 95% expecting an increase in workers' use of social media to amplify their voice. And 46% of companies actually expect social and environmental concerns to become an increasing focus for workplace activism in the near future. This has a direct kind of linkage to ESG. And And so I think, like, just kind of coming across these insights and this data, I was just thinking about how it's going to become increasingly important to create open and safe spaces for dialogue, within organizations, especially for young employees, to also share their thoughts and concerns regarding sustainability without the fear of retribution. And I think those in HR roles can really help create such a supportive environment that facilitates, this healthy dialogue, and directs this, this passion of young people to constructive problem solving, for sustainability within the company. So I think there is this great opportunity to really leverage the passion and power of young people, and direct it, in the direction of the good for the company as well. So I'm just going to.
Thanks, Marty. Thank you. No, that makes complete sense, and I think a couple of points that really resonated with me, that an employee is also a citizen and also a consumer of what goes around him or her, right? Or the family is, the parents are, the children are. So we all have that social responsibility, and the fact that ESG is everybody's business. Just the way I say HR is not a function, but it's an experience. How do you experience that interconnectedness or relationship? And while the function may be a steward of creating those experiences, but in a company of 300,000 people, 50,000, 10,000 people, a function of 150 people will not be able to drive it without everybody participating. Dr. Mukund, I know you've published a book, and possibly a lot of stuff that we're talking about is mentioned in your book. At the end of your response, do let the audience know the name of the book that you've published, so that if they want to read it, they do that. But I had a different question for you, but I'm going to change track because I'm looking at a couple of comments that are coming in from the audience. So, the one question was that sustainability is important, but what about livelihood? Isn't that equally important? And is there a conflict between sustainability and livelihood? And it is a perceived conflict, which is why possibly India Inc. or even the world over, organizations haven't done so well, because they feel they may not be as competitive if they start looking at sustainability versus, whether it's the price of production or the reach of the product, right? So that was one question. And the other question which came up was saying, what about governance? Is it all about sustainability, or how much, of emphasis we need to give on governance as well? So these were the two questions from the audience I'm picking up. There are many, but in the interest of time, I'm just picking up two and uh, sort of putting them up to you.
Sure. On the first one, can there be a conflict all the time? And in fact, it is the responsibility of leaders, therefore, to find out what is the best way of mediating some of the tension that exists between a focus on sustainability and a focus on growth, job creation, etc. A good example in India is what is going to happen to the coal industry. Around the world now, there are increasingly strong calls for stopping coal production, no longer funding the operation of new thermal power plants. In India, you have a company like Coal India Limited, which has several 100,000 employees, several million, I understand, pensioners. Now, if tomorrow they were told that you have to shut down because the international community is worried about climate change and the contribution of coal to that, what's going to happen to those several 100,000 employees and the million pensioners? Who's going to support their future? So there has to be then a concerted focus on issues such as compensation, including, by the way, for people who may have invested in some of these kinds of companies. There need to be discussions around reskilling of the workforce that is going to be displaced. All this is part and parcel of what is now being termed the just transition. So there is an acceptance that there are going to be lots of industries that will be impacted because of the need to evolve out of our current models of development. And therefore, you need justice and equity in the way in which the solutions are found. And the solutions will not happen by themselves, and they will not happen because of market forces. You need a dialogue between industry, government, civil society, non-profits, think tanks, everyone coming together and finding the resolution. So yes, that's going to be a major challenge, and particularly so for developing countries like India. Your second question was on governance.
Right.
And again, I think because of the kind of impact all of these ESG issues are creating on an ability of a business to really continue to potentially even exist. The point Manvi made about climate change posing an existential crisis. And it doesn't have to be existential for the entire globe. If you were just on the coastline and sea level rise was going to be, let's say, 1 meter, you could potentially have a plant that's operating there suddenly fade out of existence in the next few years. So it can impact your business in incremental ways that can destroy a lot of your substance. So you do need leadership that is able to foresee the potential risks, but also equally, as we discussed with the auto industry, opportunities. Because just as one door gets shut, perhaps another door gets opened for the business to continue to grow and job creation to continue. So you need leaders who can see this future, who can start taking the right steps to align themselves with what is going to happen in the community and society and leverage the best opportunities that arise. So the quality of leadership, the kinds of investments in preparing them to really take on some of these new challenges is going to be very, very important for organizations. And I love what Manvi said, every function, every role, every individual has to be sensitized. And I think it's a great start made with even having this kind of a session in the National HRD Networks conference. My book is called Outlast, and the whole premise is that the businesses that will outlast are the ones that take ESG seriously. So the subtitle is How ESG Can Benefit Your Business. That's the title of my book. It's came out with HarperCollins a few weeks back.
Thank you, Dr. Mukund, and congratulations on the book.
Thank you. Thank you so
Yes,
much.
I think we all need to be reading up as we become the champions and influencers on the subject. Uh, you made this point about we need these kind of leaders to make that change. And I'm wondering whether the leaders will have an appetite because the financial markets are geared up to recognize only short term results, right? So I think the interconnectedness of the investor community, the financial reporting of ESG, trying to even do it, it's like each one of us doing our own little bit. Of course, it is of great value in support of the environment. But the change, it almost seems to me that maybe one generation will have to sacrifice something and make such fundamental changes. Otherwise, the pace at which we're trying to go and sort of get consensus, because we saw what happened with COP26, right? That consensus is not really working. And I don't know. I mean, I'm just raising it. I don't know how to get that message across to, let's say, our generation now, who has inherited, contributed to the environmental whatever degradation around us. How do we get there where we're saying, okay, we are willing to make these really difficult sacrifices, otherwise we're not going to exist as a race? I don't know if Manvi and Dr. Mukund, you have some comments on this. And I think with this we will literally, like, the last question, and we'll need to close. We are just about 9-10 minutes away from our closing time.
Manvi, you want to go first?
I think, like I said in the beginning, we don't really have a choice. So we have to kind of go all out and be very clear about the why behind, the why behind ESG, and the what and the how kind of follows. In fact, I was reading about a very inspiring company that I personally admire, Patagonia, which is, an adventure gear company. And if I can actually just dig out their latest mission statement, it is so purpose driven, and it says Patagonia is in business to save our home planet. you
Mm,
know and they were one of the early players to, to give you an example. They just decided that, all the cotton that we use is going to be organic cotton. And at that time they didn't have the supply chain for organic cotton. They didn't know how it was going to be figured out, but they just went ahead and did it, and then they built it. So I think we have to really go back to the why, and then the what and the how will follow. And I think, likewise, there are many companies who have been pushed to actually go back to that why, and really kind of attach that higher purpose to to their why, their reason for existence as well. And one famous example is of Coca-Cola. And and we know that Coca-Cola, of course, has a huge potential, like, environmental footprint. It's been in the past accused of contributing to groundwater depletion. It's also a major contributor to single-use plastic waste. But what's interesting is, I think all of this actually spurred the company to really go back to their vision board and really redefine their identity and their purpose. You go on their website, their purpose reads refresh the world, make a difference. And their vision reads loved brands done sustainably for a better shared future. And then they even go on to explain their vision, which is to craft the brands and choice of drinks that people love, to refresh them in body and spirit, and done in ways that create a more sustainable business and better shared future that makes a difference in people's lives, communities, and our planet. So I think, I was just sharing these examples to draw light on this aspect, that any organization embarking on that, the ESG journey, actually has a wonderful opportunity to revisit the why behind their existence. And I think that's really the starting point. The what and how will follow. And of course, the HR function has a crucial role to reflect on this and shape this.
Thanks, Manvi. Thank you. Dr. Mukul?
So I'd like to make three quick comments about disruption, because I think what you were asking is one generation potentially going to have to sacrifice. So let me give you three sort of points of view. The first is it is beginning to happen, and not everyone will pay the same price. What Europe is doing currently as we speak, they're creating something called the carbon border adjustment mechanism. And what will that do is penalize imports into the European Union from countries that don't have high climate change redressal standards. So if you're not doing enough to control carbon emissions in Indian market, for instance, you may soon find it difficult to export into the European Union. Initially, your goods and maybe in future your people will not be allowed into those markets. So disruption is going to happen. It's going to be potentially thrust on us by other markets which have higher standards. The second, going back to the point we made about corporate India, unfortunately, when disruption has been presented, potentially even as an opportunity, the tendency has always been to slow things down. A great example is a couple of years back, you will recall, the Niti Aayog said, why doesn't the entire why doesn't the entire two-wheeler industry go electric by 2025? India is the world's largest producer of two-wheelers. If we take a forward stance, we could actually start exporting electric two-wheelers to the rest of the world, lead the world in innovation in that particular segment. Most of the industry was up in arms and said, we've just made the transition on fuel emission standards from BS4 to BS6. We've invested a lot. We'll have standard assets. We have to stay with the internal combustion engine. No question of moving to electrification. Now, willy-nilly, because of some new startups that have come into that space, almost all the OEMs are having to do it anyway. So there is this often resistance to swift change, which slows things down, but eventually people come around. The last point I'll make is the one ESG issue that we've grappled with in India for so long is gender diversity. And if you will recollect, and we all are aware, the Indian Parliament has sat on a bill for reservation of a third of the seats for women for almost over 20 years. We aren't able to make that change. Where are some of these other issues going to be issues in which it'll be any easier to make change? I think we need to introspect and see whether going to the heart of the political system and the power structure, we can do more to bring back a lot of these issues onto the central agenda. These are the issues of our times.
Right. Thanks so much, Dr. Mukund and Manvi, and for bringing it so alive and up and center, really putting it in everybody's homes. And Manvi, like you gave that vision statement, and I'm thinking that vision statement was earlier around customers and products and possibly your company, of course, and the country. But this was the first one I was hearing, which is for the planet. That's just so wonderful to hear. And maybe those are the things we'll have to all rethink about. So thank you so much for a wonderful discussion.
Thank you.
What a delight to listen to Dr. Mukund, Miss Manavi, and Miss Smriti beautifully manage the conversation on how important sustainability really is and how it is each and everyone's responsibility to contribute towards it. Definitely an inspiring session for everyone present. Thank you for your valuable time and blessing us with your instincts. Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye. Have a great rest of the day. Bye bye.
Thank you.
To the audience who are posting their learnings on LinkedIn and Twitter, do not forget to use our hashtag NHRDNC22. Stay tuned for the next session. Thank you.